us started for this session, which is called Using Data Insights to Plan for the Future. I'm delighted to welcome Benny Cullen, the Director of Research and Innovation at Sport Ireland, who's going to talk to us about population modelling and planning future provision and programmes.
Woo! Yay!
Hello, how are you?
Can I use the roaming mic?
You can if you wish, yeah. First one there should be, yeah, that one. Is it on?
Hello? 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 Okay, super. Alright, hi folks. My name is Benny Cullen. I'm Director of Research and Innovation at Sport Ireland. Big thanks to the conference organisers for inviting me to come along and talk to you about some of the work that we're doing to try and advise policymakers and government target setters, and we hope down the line those who develop infrastructure and plan infrastructure. There we go. I think I'm going the wrong direction. Here we go. Alrighty. So our models are built off a number of data sets. The largest data set is data we pull down from the census and the Central Statistics Office, the census data from the historic census, and then population modelling that the Central Statistics Office develops to inform government policy in general. And then we we combine that with sport-related data. So we manage the Irish Sports Monitor. It's one of the longest and largest population surveys of sport and physical activity globally. And we're fortunate to have had it in Ireland since 2007. It's what we call a random digit dialing telephone survey. It's rolled out continuously throughout the year. It brings about 8,500 people a year, and from that sample we can make pretty good statistical estimates as to what's happening in the population. We also run the Children's Sport and Physical Activity Study. That's done in schools with similar sample sizes, and from time to time we draw in data from the Eurobarometer surveys that are run by the European Commission. So if we talk about modelling and trying to project stuff that's happening in the outdoors, one of the big challenges we have is, well, how do you define outdoor recreation? Because sometimes it's a sport in its entirety, and sometimes it's a subset of a sport. So is all cycling outdoor recreation, or is it just mountain biking? And where does BMX fit in, and where does cyclocross fit in? So we record about 360 sports through instruments like the Irish Sports Monitor, and luckily the National Outdoor Recreation Strategy has defined more or less what it considers to be an outdoor sport or not. And so some of these sports we've very well defined within our own research, walking, hill walking, leisure cycling, mountain biking, and others are a little bit harder to define. So rock climbing we have in there, we don't differentiate between bouldering and rock climbing. And then there are sports that are really small, like caving. So we pick it up, but we pick it up in really small numbers when we do our random sampling of the population. So we're better at determining what's happening in some sports, the larger ones, than we are in the smaller ones. Alright, so I'm going to try and give you a rattle through some of the work that we've done. So what we've done is we've taken data from the Central Statistics Office, we've taken historical data from all of our population surveys, and we've put it into an Azure-based kind of data lake. And from that data lake, started trying to build models, first of all, of what happened in the past and what sport looks like, and then I'll show you later on how we try and use those models to try and predict what might happen in the future. So the very first question we ask in our survey is a walking question. And the reason for that is the physical activity that dwarfs every other physical activity is walking. There are more people who walk for recreation than all of the other sports combined by a country mile. And so walking is a really, really important physical activity in the nation. And so we measure that separately. So down the bottom here you'll see the question that we asked. The first question is, I'd like to ask you about any recreational walking you did in the last 7 days. Do not include walks for transport, such as walking to work or to the shops, but do include walks undertaken for exercise, recreation or leisure. In the last 7 days, did you undertake any such walks? And what we see up the top left, I'll orient you here a little bit, these are walking prevalence rates. You don't need to be able to see all the numbers here, we're just giving you an idea of the kind of data that we have. And so what we see in Ireland is that walking prevalence has been increasing. The data here starts from 2015, 63% up to 68% in 2022, with a big peak during the pandemic. And most people will be aware that during the pandemic, walking frequency increased quite a bit in Ireland. But then once we know that people walk, we ask them questions within the last 7 days on how many days did you walk. Something that's interesting about walking is a lot of walkers, over a quarter, walk every single day. So it's a very habitual thing. Might be linked to dog ownership, that came up before. And also, how long do you walk for? So when you go for a walk, how long do you walk for? So we see that most people walk for an hour or less. We ask people their age, so we can do a demographic profile of the age of people who walk, and we also ask them their gender. So we know that more women are more likely to walk for recreation than men. We asked them questions about their pace, that's so we can understand how much contribution they make to meeting health guidelines. So we know that most people walk at a steady or a fairly brisk pace, kind of 80% of them, and that the last 20% are split between slow walkers and very fast walkers. And then down the bottom here, I think is a question that's of great interest to the outdoors, because most of this walking happens on footpaths and roads. So 40% of people say, well, I walk around my local roads, and another 14 or so percent, say 15% say they walk around their local footpaths. We have another 20% who walk in parks, and then over the far side here, it's a little bit hard to see, but 9% beach or seafront, and a similar percentage we say walk on forests and trails. So you get that idea that walking as an activity is really, really broad, but then if you try and define it within the context of outdoor recreation, that's up to you guys to decide how much of that walking is outdoor recreation and how much of it is something else. After we ask the walking question, we ask this really long question down here. But effectively what that question is, do you do any other physical activity, exercise, or sport in the last 7 days? The people who report yes, we get their prevalence rate. So what I did was I took some of the key sports that are in that big long list from the National Outdoor Recreation Strategy. I pulled them home over here into this tree graph on the left-hand side. So about 7% of the population swim on a weekly basis, 5.8% run, about 5% cycle. Hill walking is interesting because we asked the first question about walking, and then in the context of this question, about 1% of people come back and say, I hill walk. So they see that separate to the general walking question, and they report the hill walking. And I'll touch a bit on those hill walking stats in a bit. And once we know whether they do any of those sports, we ask them a similar group of questions. Where do you do that activity? Who do you do it with? For how long do you do it when you do it? How frequently do you do it in the last 7 days, and at what intensity do you do it? And we asked that related to their breathing. Was the activity you did enough to raise your breathing rate? Was it enough to cause you to sweat? So we look at some of the activities. This is running. So a lot of the running happens at public place, about 80% of it. The frequency is mostly between less than 3 days a week. Most people run for less than 60 minutes, and most people who do so at a vigorous intensity and by themselves. What's important here is to understand that there are kind of different sports look very, very different. And I'll flick through some of the other ones. I think I've got about 10 of these to begin with, but I won't put you through all of that. But I'll look at 2 or 3 just to show you there's a lot of variety between these sports. And all this data is quite important when we come to the modelling function and trying to predict what's going to happen in the future. Because we need to know where these people are doing their sports and with whom. We need to know what age they are, what gender they are, and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so that's running. And then that's swimming. So I'll flick back and forth. So you can see running, most of it is in public places, right over here. Most of it is on your own. If I flick to swimming, no big surprise, we see this big shift into gyms and sports centres. And we talk about swimming, it's not all outdoor swimming. Most swimming happens in swimming pools. These are somewhere else, are generally hotels that are captured in gyms and sports centres. We have this public place here. So maybe up to 20% of swimmers who are out swimming in the outdoors as opposed to swimming in swimming pools. We also see the emerge of this kind of casually with friends and families. There seems to be this social component to swimming, maybe more so than there is in running. We see in the frequency about 50% of people doing it once a week. Duration, most of it's less than 60 minutes. We see the intensity of swimming is lower than the intensity of running. I guess just to highlight, we can do that for every sport. The profile for every sport and activity changes quite significantly. These dashboards are online. I think I gave this presentation to Nora's recently. So you can just click and filter to wherever you want. You click on a filter and it'll filter out that particular sport that you're interested in. So this is what these sports are, where they're participating, and it fits into that. What is outdoor recreation and what isn't outdoor recreation? That's a bit that we need to understand for the modelling. And the second bit is, who are these people? So what do these people look like? And again, every sport looks very different. So this is in the case of hill walking. More women report hill walking in the last 7 days than men. You get this interesting spike in 16 to 19-year-olds, 25 to 34-year-olds, and this declining prevalence of walking with age, which can be a bit of a surprise to people because generally hill walking is associated with older populations rather than younger populations. And I might show a little bit why that's happening. This is the disability gradient for walking, and over here is the socioeconomic gradient. So those who are more affluent are more likely to go hill walking than those who are less affluent. We also capture 4 kind of domains of each sport. So for each sport, we ask people about their active participation in the last 7 days, but we also ask them whether they're a member of a club related to that sport. We also ask them whether they volunteer for that sport, and we ask them whether they spectate that sport. And the spectating is possibly not quite as relevant for most of the outdoor sports, but some of the other components are. So in the case of hill walking, we ask people about hill walking membership. We still see this dominance of female over male, we see a big change in the age profile. And this isn't unique to hill walking, we see this in loads of sports. So the people who do the sport could be quite different to the people who are part of the official community of the sport. So club members of hill walking clubs are significantly older than those who are out hill walking in general. And so they are interesting factors to take into account when we're trying to develop policy and develop infrastructure for people to understand truly who is the infrastructure being developed for. Okay, the other thing we can do then is track these activities over time. So we've seen kind of what the activity is, we've seen what kind of people do these activities, and then we can also track these activities over time. So rock climbing is quite interesting because it's an activity that is in growth, albeit it's quite a niche activity. But despite that, we can still see rock climbing within our samples in the population that we have. So quite a small activity, but we can see its growth over time, and also we can see is the impact of the pandemic. And I can't remember if I have the slide here. In fact, I think I might have taken it out, but you see about rock climbing is the emergence of climbing centres. So the growth in rock climbing, again, it's back to the outdoor recreation question. Is rock climbing outdoor recreation if it's done indoors in commercial climbing centres? I'm not going to give you the answer to that, but these are challenges that emerge when we try and define what is it that we're modelling and what is it that we're projecting. And so you see this effect of climbing, outdoor rock climbing centres, and indeed travel restrictions that occurred during the pandemic on rock climbing rates. And again, we can do that for each one of these sports. And I won't go through each one. We can do it for each sport, we can do it for each domain of the sport, and we can also understand the full demographic breakdown of all those domains. So has rock climbing increased more for women than it has for men? Is the growth in rock climbing due to growth in particular age groups over other age groups? So I think actually that's the climbing male-female comparison there. So similar rates of rock climbing, but it seems that men were more likely to recover and to get back into rock climbing at a quicker rate than women. Albeit, all of this sits within kind of statistical margins that are, so there might be some variability within that. The other thing we can do is we can look at it at a local level. So we can drill down to local level. This is swimming data for Cork versus Dublin. And even though we've got there's an error here in the MOE calculation, but what we see over the years, 2015 to 2022, is higher rates of swimming in Cork than we see in Dublin City. Despite the fact that there will be a lower density of swimming pool availability, we still see higher rates of swimming consistently in Cork. So we can do these kind of county by county analysis and see whether particular activities are more popular in certain parts of the country than others. Okay, this comes to the crux. So that's all the stuff about the past, really, and all of the data we can collect about the past and how we can cut and slice that data. Then we start to talk a little bit about the future. So this is where we try and take that data and we overlay it on top of work that the Central Statistics Office have done. And what the Central Statistics Office do is they try to project what the future population of Ireland might look like. And they need to do that for planning of schools, hospitals, roads and all the rest. And so they have a number of models that they run. There's a model M2, F2, but we can, through our dashboard, through our data lake, we can just flick between one model and the other. And they all paint a similar enough picture of the future of Ireland and the current state of Ireland. So this is the model in 2022, this is the age of the population along the bottom, and this is the number of people in each age group. And so there's something really interesting in the Irish population that isn't replicated in other populations, and that is that we have a camel hump profile. So there are 20% more 10 to 14 year olds in Ireland. This is from 2022. So 20% more 10 to 14 year olds in Ireland than there are 20 to 24 year olds. And there are 30% more 40 to 44 year olds than there are 20 to 24 year olds. And so if we project over time, that camel hump moves. So this is us in 2030, and the 10 to 10 to 14 year olds are now drifting closer to the 20 to 24 bracket. The 40 to 44 year olds are drifting closer into their 50s. And if we project out a really long time into 2050, this is what the future of the country looks like. 1.5 million people over the age of 65, a huge bulk of people, what is now my age category, in their 40s, and no major generation coming in terms of replacing those people. And so all of that's quite important if we think about where the country is going and what kind of infrastructure and facilities we need to build in the future. And so what we see really is the need to be providing, I'll just flick backwards for a second, is to be providing infrastructure in the short term for an emerging young adult population, preparing for that, being ready for that. In the space of hill walking, you saw a lot of hill walking activity was kind of in some of those younger populations. So being ready for that, and we can quantify some of that. And also being ready for this ageing population, which in 10 or 20 years' time, we're going to have many more retired people. So what kind of activities are they going to be interested in? What kind of infrastructure, programs and facilities do we need to build? And so here's an example of how we bring it to life just for one sport. So this is for swimming. we would have done a lot of work with this with Swim Ireland, who were trying to build kind of national swimming strategies, trying to understand what capacity was needed in swimming pools, and they've taken this and overlaid it into some of the GIS data that I think Louise was presenting to you guys earlier on. And effectively what we take is the prevalence rate of swimming in 2022, which was 7%. We calculate, well, if you wanted to reach the national sports policy target of 50% of people playing sport, how much would swimming have to increase by to achieve that target? Or if you wanted to reach 60%, which was set by the programme for government, what prevalence of swimming would you need? We can adjust the prevalence here, and we plot it in, and we start to see what actually what's the gap likely to look like from 2022 to 2027. And over the right hand side we use some cards to summarise both the state of the population, but also the number of swimming participants, the projected number of participants, and the gap between the two. And so we can start to plan in real numbers in terms of actually how many people do we need to be able to accommodate, in this case in swimming pools, but it could be replicated for hiking trails, mountain biking trails, or climbing walls, or whatever it might be. And so that starts to get us into some real world conversations then, with policymakers to go, where do you fit the other 140,000 people into the current swimming infrastructure or training infrastructure? So that's some of the work that we're doing. These dashboards are currently sitting in-house in Sport Ireland, built on kind of in-house infrastructure, but by the end of the year we hope to have them live and out publicly available, so people in the sector will be able to access them, start putting them up. And I think the next stage will be to link in with the work that Louise is doing and trying to overlay that with GIS data and trying to understand the capacity of the existing sporting infrastructure and where that capacity is. Alright, that's it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Billy.